there's hand signals for everything, like how to boom out, boom in, hoist up, hoist down, that kind of thing. Like usually like if they're placing something on a roof or something like that, or you got some like something really big. But yeah, usually they got all the hand signals in there. There's first aid. There's even like how to tie knots, which can be handy for stuff because you're up on a roof, usually hauling stuff up in a bucket or something like that. So I know I've done a lot of that. So some of those knots are actually pretty decent. First aid in it. There's even like the proper towards the end of the class. I even have like an extra credit. There's going to be one. Well, there's three included uglies quizzes that I do, and then like in the last week, I'm going to give you like an extra credit uglies one. But that one I have you look up like a safety step. So there's also like even safety, like okay, how would you power down this kind of thing, and what are the steps, and you'd be surprised. It's like you might know some of them, but there's like for the proper power down sequence, there's actually 6 steps. So it's like, and this lists everything to do there. So yeah, this book it's money well spent, and it's something that pretty much through your whole career, I would think you would always want to. I would update it. It's not that expensive. You can get it in different languages. I worked with one guy. He had a hard time reading English, Mexican guy, and I talked to the boss, and I was like, they have the Spanish editions on there, and he's like, that's a great idea. So he got it for him, like a little thing. The guy was really happy, and I was like, there. Now you can't tell me that you can't read the stupid book. No. But yeah, so I have the chapters 5 and 6 quiz open in uglies, and it'll be due by next week, and then I want you to start looking. And now we're going to a little speedy here, so we're going to look at kind of a skip around here after, because this is today's lecture will be on chapter 7, luminaires, right, lights, and then after that we're going to kind of bounce around a little bit. I got chapters 15, 19, and 23 to take a look at. Just information I feel that we should cover in the scope of this class that will be more beneficial for you. I mean, some of the other stuff basically everything in the book is beneficial, right? But I mean, as far as getting the ground basics for this class, I think this is another route to go too, is adding in these chapters. So I know it's a heavy load, but yeah, 15, 19, and 23, and then but yeah, you have the two quizzes, right? They're take homes. I'm trying to think here. But yeah, we'll do the chapter 7 lecture today, which is that's a kind of cool one. Luminaires, right? Things that shine, things that provide light, and there's some do's and don'ts to it. It's kind of interesting. Some people, I mean, there's things you could overlook. It's kind of crazy, right? Here, let's see what I got. All right, chapter 7. Luminaires, ballasts, and lamps. My favorite. So there's different styles, of course, right? So how does the NEC define it? We always go back. It's like, okay, what's our lawyer speak here? Okay, so NEC says it's a complete lighting unit consisting of a light source, such as a lamp or lamps, together with the parts designed to position the light source and connect it to the power supply. So typically these things are mounted up, right? So you'll have them are on the sides, more typically up, like in a ceiling, overhead. Now with that, there's a certain amount of support, because some lights have a given weight to them. Some are light, but in almost all cases you have something that's called a yoke. Now a yoke is like in the olden days, a yoke would be one of those big sticks, or you'd have those 2 water buckets and you'd be walking, right? But no, a yoke is a support. So what we do it depends on the situation, depends on the light. You know, chandelier, of course, being, you know, especially are extremely heavy, but ceiling fans tend to have a good weight to them because of the motor housing and stuff like that. So you have to look at what type of lighting fixture is going to be going into this, right? So that's what they mean by what's the parts designed to position it. You don't just, and like, you know, with the case of like receptacles and switches and stuff where you just mount it to the outlet, you know, to the plaster ring and whatnot. But no, there's a little bit more that goes into these guys just because of the weight involved. You know, the typical box will up in the ceiling will not be enough to support these. But anyway, let's get on with this. So yeah, there's thousands of different types of luminaires. You can walk around, you know, electrical supply shops and stuff, and what do they have all over the place? It's more, you'll see more lighting fixtures than you'll see of just about everything else on display. Same in Home Depot, Menards, and whatnot. You go in the electrical department, what do you see a lot of is you see lights. So there are quite a variety to them and different styles. So we deal with Article 410, and it sets forth the requirements for installing them, right? What's the proper way to do it? What things we have to consider when doing it. You have things like, yeah, like suspended ceilings. That's always fun. Because then you have to take, especially, you know, you've got a suspended ceilings where it's a weak support, cork board and whatnot. So typically your fastener thing for it has to be going up. So you have to take that all into account. It's like, okay, how am I going to properly support this weight with the suspension involved, right? So a lot of times you're dealing with stuff like threaded rod, and you got to cut it down to length, and there's so many different kinds and stuff. But yeah, if you have it flush to the surface where you're directly in the ceiling, but even still up above that, you're going to have some type of yoke, you know, depending on the fixture to support it. So typically you'll have some type of, and they come in a variety of shapes and sizes, from real simple, like a flat metal piece that'll just suspend across, you know, that'll kind of attach to the ceiling joist. You could have it where you have to build like a special little deal with 2x4s that are anchored to the ceiling joist, and then suspend your yoke across that. There's so many different things, but and primarily it comes down to support of the weight. So what kind of information can we find on our lighting fixtures? Well, typically they'll tell you what the maximum wattage is for it, like what kind of light bulb it can support, right? The type of lamp that it is, the temperature rating involved. And you'll see a labeling for type IC, type non-IC, it's suitable for wet, it's thermally protected, all information. And it should be clearly labeled on the fixture itself. If it's not, there's something seriously wrong here. So what does it mean when we say these types? So we got, basically, if you look at A and B, these are can lights, recessed lights. Very, very popular. A lot of people like them. There's many, many different styles. And the thing to remember with a can light is there is an insane amount of heat involved, because you have a metal enclosure with a light bulb inside of it of some sort, right? Higher the wattage, the higher the heat. So we have to take that into account. And these are always up in the ceiling. Well, what else is up in the ceiling? Your insulation. So you can see from the two pictures, these are up in the ceiling, right? Up in the crawl space. Those are the, excuse me, those are the joists across there. What you have to be careful of is the insulation should not be flush onto the can, because even though the insulation is fire retardant, it is not typically totally fireproof. I mean, everything has a melting point, right? So we can see, okay. So insulation clearance for non-IC and IC types, right? Insulation contact types that are designed to be okay to work with insulation. So meaning we have some way of dissipating the heat within it. Very typically though, you're going to be dealing with the non-IC types, in which case that's in the figure A here, where you do have to have a good amount of clearance. keeping the insulation away from the heat generation, and actually anything else too. And there's code requirements involved on how far you're allowed. See, if we look over to the right here, what kind of distance are we talking about here? So even like you have to consider if you're close, and a lot of times you are, that's typically where they are, is mounted along the sides and the ceiling close to the wall. So you can't be flush on the wall, because typically you got the plasterboard and there's thermal insulation involved with that as well. So we can't be heating that up either. So just different things. Can lights are the trickiest, because they tend to be like the highest heat ones. So we have to make sure that, you know, typically it's not packed too close. And you the other style too, where it's not like that picture showed the fluff, you know, the popcorn style stuff. But they got another, you know, the other style is where it's just a straight roll lay. And so if you get that, you have to basically cut a nice circle of that around it as well. Of course, you don't want to cut too much, because then you're defeating the purpose of the insulation. So you have to basically follow the guidelines, keep the, you know, the minimum distance involved, and take care of cutting. But yeah, you don't want to pack too close, you know, and you got to basically read the label, see what it says like it is, right? So we look at those two types. Oops, sorry. The type IC and the type non-IC. One, you can get the insulation close, and one you cannot. So insulation contact, right? Non-insulation contact means clearance. Insulation contact means you can be fairly close onto it. But and like with everything, all luminaires must be grounded, especially because they're all up in the ceiling. So again, you have like a good tinder available, right? You got the ceiling joist, typically, you know, open air and stuff like that with all that. And a lot of places use fluff for the insulation in the top, which, oh, I hate that stuff. But anyway, so yeah, there's special requirements, and then consider your space, especially like with closets, because a closet, you know, you're all completely enclosed. Typically they're in like a tuck away area where you don't have a lot of clearance around you. So you do have to take special consideration when you mount a luminaire in a closet space, and same with bathroom installations, right? Now we've got water involved and things like that, where you do have a certain humidity factor. So yeah, we gotta always check with the NEC and make sure that we're doing it properly. That things are, you know, how, you know, we have to look. It's like, okay, violations. These are basically an installation within a closet space. So, and very typically they're the real basic style of fixture, right? Sometimes it's just like a simple little pull chain with where you can screw the light bulb in. The light bulb's basically open, and but we have to be careful of that, right? Because that's an open heat source and that kind of thing. And you know, closets generally tend to be storage and confined and that kind of thing. You could see we even have like a minimum space requirement and whatnot. And very typically, which is crazy, right, is usually you'll find these pull cord ones mounted in closets and stuff like that, right? But we have to take care because these types are really not supposed to be mounted in certain ways. You have to watch like where you have it mounted, how close to things that could be dangled like this, you know, the pendant styles. There's it's all fire hazard is what it really comes down to. It's like basically, and what is it? It's like clearance, you know, the ability where somebody could actually hit the light bulb and cause the thing to shock and stuff like that. That's like all the considerations that they have with this. And then we look at the types involved. So very typically, like okay, let's take the case here where we have like the suspended ceiling luminaire. This would be like with a drop ceiling, that kind of thing, okay? So we aren't going to be able to mount the outlet onto the suspended ceiling, right? We have to mount the outlet up to a support. So it's going to be up on like the joist somewhere, like the picture shows here. Whereas the actual fixture is going to be mounted, I don't know, some inches, some feet away from it, down. So so usually what you'll do is you'll use the flex style connection here, as you can see from the picture. And there's different styles of that. They even have like a PVC kind these days. There's the metal. You have the well, we wouldn't really need to do that on the inside, but they have like a weatherproof style, right? You can get the kind that have no wires in it. You pull the wire yourself, which is usually the case. But they also do sell a type that has the wires already within it. And so you're just cutting and mounting with that. But they do have limitations to it, okay? And basically, the rule of thumb to really kind of look at is you don't want to allow enough where you have like a swing area to it kind of thing, but you're not allowed to run it. See how it says over 6 feet down off of a branch current. And it's line drop, right? So if you had it running that far, you got more line drop going on, and then you have like I say, a grab point where this flex becomes a hazard all by itself. But they're usually mounted in the same way you'd mount EMT. You got connectors on both ends, firmly holding it in place. But that's how you would typically do it. You would have your outlet somewhere close. It doesn't have to be like directly underneath it or anything like that. It all depends on how it's being mounted. You never know. You put the outlet in thinking everything's going to look good, and for whatever reason you have to actually shift or move the fixture itself due to some kind of requirements that happen during the build. Very, very typical. But yeah, suspended ones, you got to be careful. They got to be mounted this way. You don't have the outlet box coming down to them. You're whipping off to it. And then you got to take into account what kind of yoke you're going to support it with. And very typically, you're going to use something, and it'll involve like probably some kind of threaded rod or those wire anchor supports, depending on the weight of the fixture that you're dealing with, right? I mean, if you're mounting like a chandelier or something like that, yeah, you're definitely dealing with some like heavy gauge threaded rod, okay, that can support the weight. Same with ceiling fans. But if you have something light, like the fluorescent styles, a lot of times they just use the wire anchors, the same type that are held to hold us the suspended ceiling brackets in place, right? They just have like little wire hooks to them, and you're allowed to use that. And again, it's all about weight and support. You got to make sure that it's being held properly. You don't want to. You have liability, or if the fixture falls and crashes down on somebody or something like that, you definitely don't want that. But okay, now we're dealing with types. What do we mean by this? Fluorescence and incandescence. Okay, very, very typical in these days LEDs. So an incandescent is pretty much like the original Thomas Edison light bulb, okay, where you have a filament of some kind going across, and basically when the current is applied across the filament, it causes it to get really, really hot, and it glows and provides light. And then you have, and the thing, and it's a type of light. Usually incandescents are the natural light, like fire and whatnot, where your eyes look at it, things look more natural, and that type of lighting. They're very typical. It's a standard style we use, lamps and stuff throughout the house. Even recessed lighting tends to be incandescent style. And then we switch and start looking at fluorescent, and they vary now. The fluorescent is typically like an energized gas of some kind going in through the bulb, and they provide a very strange light in a lot of cases. Of course, interesting thing these days, now they've got the LED styles in the same same shape as the fluorescent, right? Just like the tube. But the LED style actually will give a natural a natural looking light. So they're starting to become really, really popular, where it's still in the same, the same style as the fluorescent, where you've got like this really long hood fixture. And they even have like a special ballast, if you will, that's more like LED drivers. But the fluorescent, because you're energizing a gas like it is, they work a little differently. Now, in all the hood fixtures, you're going to find something they call a ballast in there. And I'm going to warn you, when 9 times out of 10, my biggest thing with fluorescents was changing the ballast. Over time, they go bad for whatever reason, and they'll give out. And so you'll find that usually in a good shop, you'll have like a lot of different ballasts just sitting there waiting, because you're going to be changing those out, changing out the ones that have gone bad. They're easy. There's usually two anchor mounts inside of the hood. You would just open up this. Basically, you take the light bulbs out, and in the center of the hood, there's like a flex steel of some sort. Usually it's on like a spring tension, so you can just squeeze it all the way down and it'll come out of the tabs. And underneath that is usually where the wiring, and then the ballast. Yep, and the ballast will be anchored in there, usually 2 threaded rods and a couple of nuts. Something that you actually will use your nut driver on a lot. One of my biggest things, it's like, because usually they're mounted way overhead. So one of the things I would have my scissors loaded up, if it's your day to change out light bulbs that have gone bad, and I'll have X amount of fluorescent bulbs in it. And then I'd also save myself some time and headaches. I'd also mount up a good handful of ballast too. Because once you're up in the air, you don't want to keep going up and down trying to get parts and going back and forth. It can be a real pain. But yeah, ballasts they're like a little mini power supply in a certain kind of way, right? It regulates the proper amount of current for the fluorescent lights, because they are a gaseous light. There's no filament inside of them. So, but yep, they do go bad. They go bad often. So yep, no filament. It's just like some kind of charged gas inside of it. So the ballast needs to control the power and rate. It's like a regulator basically, right? So it keeps the proper amount of electricity flowing to the fluorescent light bulb. Because if we just went straight with the straight AC with the full out current, that would blow these things out. They're a step down. But yeah, they work. Basically, they work by what they call like a plasma charge. You're going to arc across it, and that's what provides the glow, which is why when you flick on the light, you don't see it come on right away. It takes, a minute to charge. It's because what you're doing literally from end to end. So you have like this gas, in an enclosed area like that, and you charge from end to end. What you're doing is arcing through the whole thing. And what that does is it charges up the gas particles within it, and it's a heavier gas. This wouldn't work with, well, I guess it would work with different styles of gas. It would just depend on the power involved. So you tend to go with like a heavier, like an argon or something like that. And so that way when you charge it, it'll get off a certain glow. And that's why it's got like a weird color to it, is because of the gas. Now we use different ones, which is kind of weird. Certain gases, they have their own like light intensity to them, where you would actually have different colors. You could get pinks and purples and stuff like that. But that's usually what's involved, is you basically change, it's a different kind of gas inside of the bulb to give you different colors. If they don't, you can paint the light bulb too, of course, but I'm just stating for the sake of this. Anyway, so yeah, you're arcing through it, ionizing, charging up. It's like a plasma charge basically. And we do need ballast to operate. And even the LED styles, they're not like a true ballast like the fluorescent ones. Really, all that is like an LED driver. But they kept them in the same the same shape and size. So when you can, that way you could change them out. You could still use the hood fixture. You would just basically change out the ballast to LED drivers, and then you can use the LED fluorescence. And they do have like a nice natural light to them and stuff too, and a long life. So you'll probably run into that sometime. A lot of places have been doing that, you know, slowly incorporating it in. But yeah, they have different types of ballasts. I mean, not all are created equal. It really depends on what kind it is, and there's even how many bulbs will go into it and that type of thing. You know, you do have like the instant start where it's like a pre-charged, or they're using like capacitance to it. You have a very strange one. It has like a dimming ability to it. Those tend to be a little more costly because you need a special ballast for that to be able to do that control power to dim. It's actually a lot harder than you would think it would be, but anyway. But yeah, there's different styles. You know, it depends on what the customer's gotten, what type of thing they use. So you always want to match up, make sure you got the proper ballast number. You know, you take out this GE 1392, yeah, you want to replace it with something that's a GE 1392 or compatible. And usually the company will list off, you know, they'll have the little pain in the butt booklet that'll come with it, you know, a couple of folds of paper, and they'll list what it's compatible with, that kind of thing. But yeah, they had a little thing of 1992 that limited the types of lights we were doing and stuff. You know, it was like an energy act, and that's why the LED ones have become so popular, because you know they're a high efficiency, long lasting bulb. So that's the thing, because you wanted to get away from what they consider low efficiency, and by that, low efficiency would be like how much bang are you getting for your juice, right? So if you're not getting, you know, you're pumping so much current through it, but you're only getting like so many lumens out of something, then that would be kind of, you know, and if it's on a low end, that would be an inefficient style, right? Where if I'm getting like a really bright intensity for how much current I'm getting in there, then that would be considered a high efficiency. And that's one reason why they're actually even phasing out the incandescent styles, right? But the Thomas Edison bulb, I like to call them, is by comparison, they're more inefficient. The LEDs, longer lasting, you know, you get a lot more bang for your buck. So I need a lot less wattage involved. So I'm consuming less current. And that's the thing with basically what you guys will be heading into is looking at the efficiency of things, for at least for as far as lumens are concerned. And of course, we have formulas. No. But yeah, the voltage we run will have a lot to do with the incandescent lamp life rate. And what retards its life is basically every time, believe it or not, if you left the incandescent light on all the time, it would actually last longer than if you turned it on and off. And the reason being is when you do that, you know, when you turn it on, it's getting zapped with that, what I call that instantaneous rate of charge that drives it out a little bit over. So that actually degrades the filament a little bit. So every time you turn it on, and that's usually why, you know, I won't say all the time, but that's usually why the light bulb will pop when you turn it on, is because now it's reached that end where it's like, okay, I can't handle no more. And you just zapped it again and it went, well, that's it, I'm done. But but we have a little formula that will actually let us compute what our life would be of a light bulb, right? Depending on what kind of voltage we're hitting it with. And the strangest thing, and you wouldn't think it would make that much of a difference, but let's say we have the same light bulb, right? I mean, if we went through and looked at it, so we say, okay, what's our expected life? What's the rated volts versus the actual volts? So light bulb's rated at 120, okay? But in this case, if we have 130 here, see, we're going to take the 120, divide that by the 130, and hit it by a multiple of 13 here, and then comes out with a little variable. You can see that the point, you know, with the 130, of course, now we go below 1, and that's where our reduction comes into that. But look at the difference in hours in that. Whereas if I just had 110 running into that light bulb, look how long I would have it last. And if I had 130, look at that. I mean, we're talking like a degree of 10. So, I mean, if I had my choice, I'd rather have it last 3,000 hours than what, 350 hours, right? But yeah, you'd be amazed at the amount of voltage, how it'll actually degrade it. And that's one of the reasons why really they're starting to try to phase out the standard incandescents. Um, I'm not sure. I know they were making. I don't know if it's still. I can't remember, but I know we stopped manufacturing like the straight Thomas Edison bulbs in the United States. But I do know you can still buy knockoff ones. You know, other countries like Mexico and stuff are making them, but they wanted to phase it out just because. Well, and it's partly because of the waste too, right? So if you're constantly, especially if you're doing something like this, so you're constantly changing out light bulbs. They wanted to do away with that and have something where that lasts long. And again, the efficiency, how much current does it pull in versus the other style? Oh, anyway, so here's a very typical combinational thing for a three-way, how we can control it. I know it's a strange looking little deal, right? But if we look, those are switch markings. So here's a three-way one involved, and here would be a two, right? And then over on this side is, again, a three-way involved. Now, like I said previously, the thing with those, you know, three-ways really aren't that bad. Like I say, on the one side, you have them, there's two brass screws, and then the other one, it's kind of a darker, like an almost black screw. And as long as you match up, because the black screw is meant to be like your carrier, so as long as you match up properly with the other switch, you should have no problem. But if you end up crossing, that's when you get the effect where, yep, you go down there and turn this one on, it won't turn off with the other side because that carrier is reversed. So the light will still stay on, but yeah, you won't be able to control it properly with the three-way. Very, very commonly miswired. But yeah, this is like a typical, basically it's just showing the hot and neutral coming in, right? And you can see, of course, neutral never, ever, 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 ever has a switch on it, right? That's how we see that. So you never, ever, 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 ever interrupt neutral. Neutral always has a straight run. All switching and devices and whatnot are always hooked up on the hot. So you can see the hot runs in, right? Comes through here. Circle means that's our pair, if you will. So we have to run these two together. So we had our hot coming up to the three-way, and then we have the carrier involved. Well, typically look at it two carriers, right? Carrier one and carrier two. And as long as they're matched up properly on the one end, you should be all right. So your hot would come in here, and then out on the other side, basically you'd be feeding whatever you're powering up. In this case, we're going to be powering up that little light. That's a lumen symbol. Now, just make sure you follow it through, because see, now the neutral is attached up to the actual device that's going to have the work, but never, ever, ever do we have it on the switch itself. It'll be in that box, but it won't be hooked up to the switch. I don't know, just a little something. It's a fairly easy chapter. Pretty much the only really complicated deal to this whole chapter is this guy right here, just figuring out, like, you know, what the life of a light bulb would be. But again, you know, as we're phasing these out, we have to deal with this less and less, and look at the really, really long life of the LED styles. And in fact, I don't see why you wouldn't. If I were doing a brand new house right now, I would go with all LED fixtures throughout the whole house, just because of the, you know, very typical 7-year rating. I mean, I'd much rather go where I don't have to change a light bulb out for 7 years versus the ones I got to change out every, well, depending. I mean, you say 3,000 hours, and it really depends, you know, do I have it on 2 hours a night in the front room kind of thing? Do I have it on all day? You know, if I'm running it 24 hours versus a couple hours, you know, you got to really look at the way the life is going on that. And that's about the most complicated thing. And then, like I say, really watch where you're installing. You know, you get the ceiling mounts and stuff like that. You always got to look at the heat ratio involved, and look at the weight ratio involved. You know, the heavier The heavier the fixture, the more support you're going to need for it. And like I say, to the point where says really you look at some of them like the real small ones and stuff, they just have a very simple yoke that can strap right across the box and give it some light support, just for a couple of pounds, to the point where you could have a chandelier weighing like in excess of 100 pounds. And well, now you're talking like some major steel is going to be involved to go up in the ceiling, right, to hold that kind of weight. So you just have to take it, and there's many different styles of yokes. And in fact, real typically on like the suspended ones or chandeliers and stuff, a lot of times you'll have like an eye hook involved. So you would have this thing mounted up on the ceiling joist somewhere, right, giving us some really sturdy support. And then by a chain and whatnot, you would actually have it suspended to anchor. Like if you have a suspended ceiling, you would literally have like an eye hook, and then what you would do is attach a chain and suspend and actually hold that chandelier up. They do it with threaded rods, where you would actually have the threaded rods come down and have a yoke support across that. But there's so many different styles and ways that we can do this. It really would depend on the situation, when you're dealing like I say, what kind of suspended ceiling, how much clearance do I have? Am I straight in the ceiling? What kind of room do I have up in the crawl space above? The attic area, that kind of thing. But yeah, there's a lot of considerations that go into that. You would think it's nice and simple and easy, but no. And then and the same with the recessed lighting too, like the cans. The good thing about those is typically they come with their own yoke supports already built into the fixture. Usually they're like on a slide arm that's meant to fit in somewhere in the ceiling, and you just basically slide them out to fit the area of the ceiling joist, and then just basically screw them right in, right, and anchor them in. I would, just between me, I would always use a screw over a nail, just simply because of the light. Because if I screw it in, I know it's going to stay there. And I know 10 years down the road, it's still going to be pretty much just as tight as when I installed it. Now with a nail, not so much. I mean, there's different things that could happen, and then the nail, the wood swells and stuff like that, it can actually back that nail out. So in doing these things, putting in yokes and stuff like that, I strongly recommend using screws over nails whenever possible. Even to the point of doing like outlets and stuff when you mount them on. I know they have like the plastic ones that have the nails already built in, and those are fine. But if you're doing your own like box mounting, basically, I always ran around. I had my own screw gun, and I had a whole like little pouch full of different size screws and whatnot, and I would just zip. I mean, it's faster, it's easier, it's cleaner. I'm not pounding away at something with a hammer. I'm not a carpenter, so I'm not a, what do you call it? I'm more like a hit or miss kind of guy with a nail. The electrician is not basically real practiced at pounding in nails, but with a screw gun, oh boy, I can every time with no problem. So just my 2 cents in there. But anyway, now that's pretty much. I guess this is a shorter lecture. Next week we'll get in a little more because we're gonna bounce through these chapters. But the lumens are fairly easy. Like I say, you just really have to look at what you're dealing with. And the good thing is I mean, when you guys are coming in, you're gonna be dealing more often than not with LED styles now. But you might have to go through and convert. And remember that when you do this too, right? You can't, your boss comes down and just hands you LED bulbs, and you go up to a fluorescent hood. You got to change that ballast. I mean, there's just no 2 ways around it. And he thinks that you can go ahead and just pop them in. It's like, no. You have to very politely re-educate them. No. But yeah, and it's a nice thing because, and especially, oh my God, you get into, and that's with anywhere, if you get into a setting where, and they had a PM where I had it several times, and you go like in a break area and that kind of thing, and change out these bulbs because it's that life cycle time. And a lot of places now, believe it or not, they, you know, by that, like that computation, okay, what's my expected life of these bulbs? And they'll go through and map out, okay, this room, we installed these bulbs on this date, so they should die on this date. So you literally set up your PM that way, right? And you would go through, and even if the bulbs are still good or not. And here's an interesting thing. And in fact, and this is why I would recommend it. If you go up to, you know, 2, 3, 4 four bulb, like, you know, fluorescent fixture, believe it or not, okay, let's say one of them's gone bad. Let's say you got it's a 4 bulb fixture. One of them's gone bad. You go up in there and you put a brand new one in for that bad one, right? Believe it or not, by having that new one in there, you are going to shorten the life of the other 3 remaining bulbs. And you would be much better off, and at least it's like, you know, labor wise and whatnot, changing all 4 of them all at the same time. Because by having that new one in, it's literally, you know, now it's all brand new, it taking less power and whatnot. It's literally going to force more onto the other ones and shorten their life expectancy as well. I can almost promise that if you go and change that one bad fluorescent, that within a week you're going to be changing out another bulb in that same fixture. I can almost guarantee it. Yeah, there's always exceptions, but I would give it a good like 90-something% that's what you're going to be doing again. And usually with the way the fluorescents are, you know, the very minimal, you're always pulling out a ladder, if not a scissors lift of some kind. And if you get in some places, I've had the 2 types, right? The motorized scissors lift, which is, it's not bad. Things are wobbly though when you get really high, but they also got the other kind I've had the joy of working with, and they're not bad, but they're a pain to set up. Where you've got the manual crank one, where you're essentially climbing up a ladder to get into your little crow's nest up in the top, right? But it's like a dolly style where you're pushing it on wheels. But when you get to the position you want, you literally have to pull out 4 anchors and clamp them down. Okay, there's a lot that goes into this before you can start climbing. And then you got to sit there and crank your crow's nest up to where you want to be. And then you got to lock it down and everything. And then you got to climb up there and bring all the materials that you're going to need. Because if you don't, your butt's going to be climbing back down again and getting the materials that you forgot. So yeah, those ones are they're quite the thing. And usually if you're like the brand new apprentice or something on the job, that might be the kind of equipment you're going to be looking at using, right? Usually the good stuff is saved for the journeyman and up kind of guys, right? And you always get what's left over. But no, that's my spiel today, gentlemen. That's what I know about lumens, you know, incandescent, fluorescent, LEDs. And it's pretty much what you'll run into out there. Right, so many types. Like I say, you go walking around electrical supply or even Home Depot and Menards, and what's the most mounted thing you're gonna see there? Just look up. Right? You got light fixtures, many varieties. Shh, would you please shut up? Yes, waggy tails. But yeah, there's a lot that goes into them. Support and space, you know, and the expected life of your bulbs, all considerations and factors to and there, and the thing, and one other thing about oh my God, dog. Sorry. He's still kind of young, but an interesting thing. Now you have to have like fluorescents. They have to be specially rated if you ever want to put them on like a dimmer type thing. You normally cannot put fluorescents on a dimmer. So you have to really look at the labeling. And like I say, those tend to be a little more costly if they want to have like a dimming effect for the fluorescents. I don't know why. That would just be strange. But hey, they're out there. You know, people are people. But yeah, if you're gonna put fluorescence on a dimmer, that fluorescent has to be rated for it. Otherwise, you're gonna have, huh, you're not gonna. It isn't gonna dim. Is really what it's gonna come down to. It's gonna be, you know, an on and off again thing. And in fact, you'll probably end up shorten out the ballast by having the dimmer going through, and it won't be able to control the power properly. And then, yeah, but that's just a little tidbit. Otherwise, you know, the incandescent styles, you always can have dimmers. You have the 3 and 4-way combinations for them. And that's, I mean, that would be about the most complicated you would ever run into, really, is your 3-way, 4-way type of thing. And the 4-way isn't as common as you think. It would depend on the situation, like size of the room, and whether you got, like I say, the really long hallway and stuff like that. Very typically, it's something that you go, you know, top of the stairs, bottom of the stairs kind of thing, where you have control of the stair lights. And so you'd have a 3-way on each end. If you do have a hallway, then, you know, one on each end is typical. But there are always special requirements. You never know. People like strange things in their house. But you guys doing okay? You have any questions, or we're good up to this point?
Good up so far.
Yeah. All right. Well, and I mean, none of the work seems crazy. I've seen, hopefully that, well, and you've seen if you did the service center and stuff, you see what all goes into it, right? And how we can size the stuff, why we have to size the stuff, and everything else. I'll tell you, you haven't lived until you've done. What was my biggest? We had one time where we were bringing in a whole new deal, and so we were bringing in 3 2-inch pipes, 3 of them, and they were coming down, and they went. I don't know if you could. Usually with that, you sometimes you have the 90-degree bends on a really large pipe, but usually, like I said, you usually only allowed one. Very commonly, if you like, especially if you're going up to a long run, a mast or something like that, you'll use we call an LB, which is like a 90, but it's got the little cover plate on it where you can take that off. And the reason being, so you can basically pull that stiff ass wire down, right? So you'd have pulling up from the top down instead of trying to kill yourself routing it through. It depends on the run. But yeah, we had 3 of those coming through, and I had a big old Bosch hammer drill that I basically, and a lot of times you're just drilling down. Right now, we had to go through a concrete. I forget how many inches thick that was, but we had to go through concrete on the wall, and I literally had to bore 3, a little larger than 2-inch diameter because the pipe's 2 inches. So, oh my God. Not a very typical thing for electrician thing to do. And another fun one is always when you have to route piping and stuff like through a yard, especially when that's had trees and stuff for a while, because you're always hitting roots. And of course you have to go down below frost line, right? So, and these days I think they went to Illinois. I think it used to be 45, but I think they've gone to 48 inches now, where you have to go down. I mean, that's 4 feet. You know, that's some digging if you're going to do a trench. Even with a trencher, that's a little ways to go down. You never know what you might find. Yeah, we had a guy not too long ago in one town I lived in, and he didn't get a hold of Julie's, the utility locators. And he literally, I swear to God, this idiot, and he's lucky he didn't die, but I guess he was trenching, didn't get a hold of Julie's, and ended up hitting like the main power feed for the north half of town. We literally had no power for like most of the day because ComEd had to come out and redo it all. Of course, he got like a really heavy fine for doing that. If he had gotten a hold of Julie's, the utility locators, right, then they would have been at fault. But he didn't bother to do any of that. So he goes trenching through, and Yeah, he popped that main service to the whole north half of town. And I was like, oh my God. Like, well, they're out there. They're out there. Some people should not be doing construction work. You'll be amazed at people that will do electrical work that really are not qualified. I guess a friend of mine got a hold of me yesterday, and I have to go over and see it, but they were telling me, but for some reason their power was out to the stove and microwave, but then they were saying they were looking behind it, and somehow, and I'm like, this doesn't even sound right, but telling me that the stove was on a GFI, and I'm thinking, why? Why would you? And but they didn't think of looking behind, right? I wouldn't think there'd be a GFI on a stove, but anyway, but yeah, because the breaker downstairs didn't trip, but the GFI for some reason tripped on with a microwave. But anyway, but yeah, you always run into weird things. But that's how we get work, right? That's how we make our money. You'll be dealing with different situations, but yeah, you shouldn't have too much trouble with chapter 7. Like I say, really the most complicated that it's going to be throughout chapter 7 is that um, expected life of a light bulb type of equation. But usually most of your factors are already given to you, and you just take into account like the voltage involved and what the expected life is of the bulb, right, at an average. So if it's like 120, then you have to play with it depending on what kind of voltage. Usually you don't have to, but in certain runs of the house, you're not getting. In fact, let's be real, the further away from the panel you get, the less close to 120 you're going to be, right? And the closer to 110 you'll be. So like if you had your panel down in the garage, let's say, okay, and it's of course, it'll be on the far end of the garage because of the meter and the service connect. Your furthest run will be the other end of the house. And so if you look at everything, powered up, directly by the garage, yeah, you're going to be nice voltage levels to it. But the further away you get, especially like, yeah, you get to that last room over there, right, the closest to the far end of the house, yeah, that's where your voltage is going to be the lowest. But it should, as long as you've done your job properly, it should at very minimal be 110, right? No. Right. All right. Well, you guys have any questions then, or you're all good with everything?
Yeah, all good.
Everything's all good.
See, this is the part I don't like. It's like I don't get to see faces and talk to everybody like in the class and stuff and go over things, but I don't know. And you're gonna send me that email, right, Nathaniel? Everything's still looking like it's on track for that job for you?
Kind of. So my boss texted me later that day and said that he was still trying to work on logistics for it. It was
Okay.
It was weird. I was completely confused by the text that he sent me. I'm like, okay.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that means he's not too clear on what they're telling him too. Then that means.
Well, I think the biggest problem is, so it's all outdoors work, and it's supposed to keep raining quite a few days next week as well. So I wonder if that's what's stopping it.
That could be, yeah. This, and it's been cold too. This weather's it's a very
Yeah.
screwy. Going into May, and we're still like in chilly weather. It's a weird one. Okay. Yeah, you haven't lived till you've done some nice, good outdoor work in the rain, huh?
Oh yeah.
Could be worse. Could be the snow, right?
Yeah, we do snow as well, but that's a whole different story.
Yeah, it is. No, I've done rooftop work in the wintertime. I've literally, well, in Chicago, and we had oh my God, we had to lay some pipe at this theater one time, and we literally I could, even when we had the full gear on, but it was so cold that we could handle about maybe 10, 15 minutes of being out there, and then had to come back inside because it was so cold. So normally, what you normally would probably be, I don't know, maybe about a 2-hour job, literally took all day just to do this, just because we were always in and out and because it was so freezing. And of course, everything stiffens up in the cold too, right? So, yeah, I hate that.
That reminds me of the time that I went down. So I supervised a mission trip down in Georgia right in the middle of summer, and we redid roof painting on a bunch of trailer homes out in the Appalachians. And oh my God, it was hot as hell.
The humidity thing.
Yeah, that too.
My dad had a cousin in Georgia. I remember, well, it was when I was a kid, but oh my God, I remember that. It was so, it's like swamp goo, right? You're just like, can't breathe. And
so much humidity, you never get dry for more than 10 minutes.
Oh, I used to tell people that. It would be like, yeah, you go take a shower, and it's like, oh, why dry off even? It ain't going to make any difference. It's like,
you get wet 10 minutes later.
Yeah. Yeah, Georgia, Florida, all that. Oh, my God. Even now, Mississippi down that way is all real nasty like that. When it's summertime, it's like, oh, you just can't breathe. Yeah, I hate that crap. Yeah, my favorite, actually, believe it or not, and even though it gets hot, was when I was out in California, because they don't have that. I think the highest humidity we had was about 40-something% humidity, which is a lot different than like here, where you get the 100, 100 and 100, and well, down there they get what, 110%, which how in the hell that happens, I don't know, but it's like, how do you get 110? It's like, it's 100% is it, isn't it? No, you get 110% humidity. It's like, huh, how about that? It's extra. But yeah, I do know that this weather is going to be crazy. Well, let me know, keep me posted. You guys all have yeah, I got my email posted on Blackboard. So if you ever have to look it up, or my number too, you can always text me. I don't answer right away all the time, but I will get back to you for sure. Now, if it gets late at night, I'm probably not going to text you because I'm getting old, so I'll probably be asleep. But I got all this weight in my beard for a reason. But no. All right, yeah, let me know, and then yeah, we'll work it around. And like I say, you guys go through your thing today, chapter 7, and then next week we got 3 chapters. They're not bad. It's basically now we're starting to get more into some of the specifics, because we do have to take a look at like the furnaces and AC. I'm going to try to, we try to cover everything that you would typically run into in a house thing, not the extra crazy crap, but you always have a furnace install and usually some kind of air conditioning. So we're going to take a look at those. And then, but anything screwy, no, we probably won't get into it, but we'll get most of the chapters. But all right, you guys have a good weekend, and I guess I'll see you next Tuesday, right? Yeah, Tuesday.
Tuesday.
All right. You gentlemen take care. I gotta find out how to end this thing.